And they generally fill the gaps by retaining the work that they've currently done or making up new work. And the new work can then become this cherry picking, and it certainly can become the sabotage to the contract. Now, in reality, we'd like to see more upwards and downwards. It's easy to look at, simple to say, but in reality, we do find this is something that doesn't happen a hell of a lot. So I think when you're looking at yourselves, the greatest difficulty you've got is actually looking towards your buying group and probably getting an understanding of what they're really thinking and what they're actually trying to achieve as they go through this type of process. So certainly early engagement of the stakeholders, to obtain the buy-in is important. And, very much so, if you're moving to this outsource model, you need a time frame. Now, one of our clients, Foster's Group, they probably had one of the strongest methods of actually going through this type of change, and they certainly did in the fleet business. Clear timelines about contract was awarded. Immediately, this position becomes redundant. After that, 6 months later, there was going to be a second position that was going to be made redundant. The head of the department actually has moved on. The 2IC is actually handling the transitional period, and at some point in time, their job will morph more into a contract manager and have some other responsibilities. But this path has been set from the beginning, and I implore you to actually, in your capacity, your involvement needs to be greater within those buying groups to ensure that this type of thing happens. Otherwise, you're going to get the type of thing that Tony addressed, which is a little bit like what was promised and what's going to be delivered and how's it actually going to be done. Because as you walk away from the table, you generally leave two groups sitting looking at each other, sometimes a bit confused, at trying to understand what they actually have to do to move forward. You've got a supplier that's going, well, I want to get in there with the product and get moving, and you've got the current operational or the buying group saying, no, I want to hang on to it. This is my livelihood. I've got the next word, monitor. And I'm going to bang on about monitoring a fair bit. And it's a role that I believe really needs to be conducted by the procurement team. Because at the end of it, you are engaging the other two parties, being the buy team and certainly the supplier. And I personally believe, and it was interesting I was talking earlier, but it's the result that you need to be in earlier with these groups and actually embedding yourself, and I'm stealing somebody else's word from that, but actually embedding yourself into that group. And you need to do it long before the tender goes out, because by the time the tender's gone out, it's actually too late. The stage has been set for disaster. And if you can get in there early, but don't exit, don't be a seagull, don't fly in and steal the chips and fly away. But stay in, and certainly in some of the categories, and certainly fleet's one of them, you need to be involved for probably about 12 months, measuring the outcome. And I think Deborah's talking this afternoon about KPIs, and that's certainly a big one. These KPIs need to be looked at slightly differently. What's in the first 3 months, what's in the 6, and what's in the 12 months. And often this is where it fails. It fails sometime in the first 3 months. So this close monitoring is required. The next, and our least favourite tender, of course, is we've had a bad experience and you're going to pay for it. And the attributes of this tender is typically it's full of compliance and has a lot of overlays again in it, and a big stick. And I mean, the stick is so big, if they hit you with it, they'll break your arm. And we've been involved in a recent tender, and they'd certainly had a very, very bad experience. And we'll talk infringements for a moment. We've all copped a speeding fine at some stage. And I'm pleased to say New South Wales has now got mobile speed cameras. So for all the contracts that we've got where we actually have a service fee for processing infringements, we're wrapped because it's going to go through the roof. So thanks, guys. Keep it up. But for us, it's a fairly simple process. In comes the infringement. We look up to see who the current driver is. Do we have a current driver's licence against it? What's the age of the actual home address? If everything lines up, we do a statutory declaration and we pass it on back to RTA or whoever it might be. And in a couple of days' time, the driver gets a notification of intent. And it's up to them to dispute it or to pass it on. So it becomes a daisy chain. So it's a really quite simple process. Except in this tender, because they'd had such a bad experience, and this is the experience, at maximum demerit points, you hop in an unlicensed vehicle, you get picked up, because you might not know it's not licensed. I mean, who here checks the rego sticker? And if you're in WA, there are no rego stickers anymore. Suddenly you've got 2 demerit points, you've lost your licence. So the impact is now on your employee, and the impact is also on the organisation where you've got a vehicle unlicensed. So in this example, what happened was they put these layers of the infringement process, sent a copy of all the paperwork to the cost centre manager, sent a copy of all the paperwork to the driver. Oh, and hang on, send a copy to the fleet department as well. These layers of cost. So when we put the bid in, we looked at this and said to ourselves, and we were lucky, we had a relationship with the contract manager in his prior job in another organisation. So we thought, well, we think we could be able to convince him that this is nonsense, because, I mean, there was about 60 clauses like this. But if we bidded the cost that it was to comply to that, we would have been either out of the market or the cost of that business would have gone through the roof. And as I said, our only saving grace is that we had a relationship and we could sit down in the negotiation phase and be really quite frank and just go, you know, this is nonsense. We really need to consider what we're doing here. So I think you need to be in that area of trying to identify this. And looking at, you need to be able to identify this. And I think the greatest problem that you've got as you consult with your buying group is to remember that buyers are liars. And they will tell you what they want you to know, because they do the same to us. So they'll be saying to you, especially if you don't have a lot of experience in that category, they'll be saying, operationally, this is important to us. What you need to do is try to decipher the bull and work out if it is important. So if you can detect this in pre-tender, that's great. But to be fair, I think quite often you'll find that this is something, or the manifest of this will be later, where you'll actually discover it has been a very bad experience and they've actually layered this tender with a lot of compliance that really didn't need to be there. So post-tender, if you discover it, we're coming back to this point. This is this monitoring. I think you need to become the umpire. You need to be sitting down with the supplier. You need to be involved with the buy group and negotiating an outcome and try to bring a bit of common sense to the table. Because if you can't do it, I think you will find that this will be the second turn of a contract that wasn't successful, and that will then definitely give that group, I think, the unmitigated right to say, see, I told you so, we need to bring it back inside again. Looking at the overall tender process, and again, I believe that you need to be involved, you need to be embedded within those groups, is that you need to ensure that the tender is a fair representation of what your organisation is trying to achieve. And I think everybody here has got that type of collective goal. Engaging stakeholders is straightforward. But probably more importantly is that whilst you're what I'll consider a professional body, if you're not engaged with that group, you need to be aware of some of their actions. And I'll give you one example. In a recent tender, we'd had the contract for 2 cycles. And we knew we were going to probably lose it because the tender that came out last time was quite different to what our business really is. And we looked at it and we put a bid in. We thought, look, it's a bit marginal. They'll probably move on because, you know, it's not our cup of tea. The process took 6 months, and it was a big chunk of business to us. It took 6 months to go through this process. And by then, we'd got the feeling we were probably on the outer because the communication started to die. But the contract manager, or the lead in this case, was actually our contract manager. So that he had to actually talk to us on our day-to-day business. But the communication started to shut down on us over that 6-month period, to the point where emails weren't being replied to and phone calls weren't being taken. And then suddenly we get a phone call. Our account manager gets a phone call on a Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock saying, hi, this is blah, blah, blah. I'm just ringing you about the tender. Look, we've got an outcome. Sorry I missed you. We'll catch up on Monday. And I get the phone call from my guy going, oh my God, what does it mean? I said, well, it's clear. It's either yes or no. It's not in between. They've made a decision. We're either in or out. Now, by that stage, we'd got over the emotion. We'd decided we're out. But the fact is this, and let me say, he wasn't part of the procurement group. You know, he was the fleet manager. this is the issue. It could have had an impact potentially to our organisation, which it didn't, which could have been redundancies. It could have meant a financial impact to the organisation. And I believe that these actions through the process, if I'd gone back to their senior management team and told them about this, there'll be some very red faces. And at the end of it, this is where, unfortunately, I think your role starts to extend a little bit further, I'm sorry to say, where the actions of those people around you and those other buy groups really do very much reflect the performance of the organisation overall. So that's just one example of perhaps where you guys are doing everything right, but other people within your organisation can undo all the good you've done and actually, cause quite a bit of embarrassment and potential harm to your supplier. Well, you know it's your fault, don't you? Because at the end of it, you made them change. And this is really this whole thing about operational sabotage, because they're either going to blame us or you. I mean, they're never going to blame themselves for why things don't quite work well. I was reading Nigel, I'll take note, I was reading the procurement magazine, and I read of particular interest. There was a section in there talking about office supply and how, you might replace a $3 pen with a generic 50-cent job, but people will spend a lot of time in telling you that the 50-cent one doesn't work well, you need the other one because it's better, or at the end of it, they'll just say, it just doesn't work, it's crap. Well, if they do that to a pen, you should imagine what they do to motor vehicles, because if they don't like what they've been given, they'll destroy it. And the mining industry, so Leighton's probably, you guys probably don't have it as bad as the mining industry, but the mining industry, if they don't like it, they'll generally haul pack it. Compressed fleet. So they will actually go through a process of undermining the decisions the organisation's been made. And let me just say,